And now, from the great state of Mississauga in Ontario, Canada, it's the Ted Wallachin Podcast. Brought to you by Tom's Place. For the finest in men's fashion, Tom's Place will suit you. And ETP Canada, providing estate administration with ease. ETP Canada. And now, here's Ted.
My next guest is the product of Italian parents, and he was born and raised in Australia. Think about that one for a second. And from that, he has provided much laughter for many people, especially here in Canada, where he has performed numerous times. Joe Avati begins his Canadian tour in June on the 3rd in Vancouver and takes him right across the country, eventually into Montreal, July the 22nd. He has 2 #1 live comedy albums here in the Great White North. Welcome, Joe Avati. Joe, welcome to the program. It's good to see you again. You are no stranger to this great land of ours, Canada, and you'll be coming to visit to your friends here starting June in Vancouver and right through till the end of July, and when you end up in Montreal. And here in Toronto, you'll be here on the 6th, 7th, and 8th, I believe, of July.
That's right, and we've just added the 5th of July to Vaughan City Playhouse. We've just added that extra show.
Now, are you familiar with Vaughan? It's a heavily Italian population.
That's why they chose it. That's why they chose it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Did you realize that, and somebody told me this, I've never checked this out, but I believe this to be true, that the city of Toronto has the largest Italian population in the world next to Rome.
Yes, I believe so. The density of Italians, and I think not only the density of Italians, but also So, for example, when you go to America and you meet an Italian from New York, not all of them are really Italian. You know, I've got, 18. My parents or great ancestors came out in the 1800s, but in Toronto, most of the ancestors came out, or forefathers came out in the 50s, 60s, 70s. So not only is the population of Italians large, they're very strong, so they still hold ties to the Italian culture very, very, very much so, more than the Americans.
Well, also too, I'm thinking, I'm sure you fit in with people in New York City, the Italians in New York City, but you don't sound anything like a New York City Italian.
No, so I look like an Italian from Brooklyn, but I sound like the crocodile hunter.
How old were your parents when they came to Australia?
Well, my father was 21. My mother was actually born in Australia, and her parents met and married in Australia. So my grandmother immigrated to Australia in 1949. My grandfather 1951. They married in 1952, and my mum was born in 1953. And given that maths, that's how you can tell how long an Italian couple has been married, or an ethnic couple, really. What you do is you get the eldest child, you add 1 year, and there you go. So my mum was born in 1953. They were married in 1952. You can bet your bottom dollar on that,
Yeah. And now, what part of Australia are you from?
I grew up in Sydney, but I now live in Melbourne, Australia. Yeah. So I grew up in the prettiest city in Australia, in Sydney.
Yeah, which has that magnificent opera house on the water that
that's right.
Been photographed about 8 million times.
Yeah, yes, and a lot of people see it. Of course, on the New Year's Eve, the fireworks display in Sydney is one of the best in the world.
Yeah, and so what got you into comedy? Was it somebody? Did your dad have a great sense of humor, or your mom, or was it someone that you saw on television?
Oh, just a 3-letter word, ego. So I grew up wanting to be a rock star. And so my dad kind of got me into it, although he doesn't really realize it. See, I wanted to be a rock star, and, coming from the south of Italy, there wasn't any rock stars from that area. So my dad said, listen, there's no rock stars in Calabria. Go and do something else. So I became a food scientist, and I won a scholarship and studied honours. And then my dad said, go get a degree and do whatever you want. So then I got 2. And I thought, you know what? While I was at university, I was going to university parties. I had this knack for being able to tell jokes and remember jokes, and impersonate lecturers, to all my fellow university graduates, and I would impersonate all the lecturers. And so I started to develop a knack for telling jokes and an ability to tell jokes and a memory for jokes. And of course, you don't just tell jokes. So I tried out at the comedy store one day, and they said, you can't just say old jokes. You have to have some original material. And I had some original material, little things like, my name's not Joe, it's Giuseppe. So I could never find a mug with my name on it. Right, so that those kind of little things that I had as a kid growing up, those little thoughts, and it went from there. So my dad, in a roundabout kind of way, not wanting me to study music and be a rock star, and making me go to university, made sort of that inroad into me being able to tell jokes. That's where I first discovered it. And so then I thought, well, if I can't be a rock star, how about I try and be a rock star of comedy? And I guess that happened. Yeah.
Yeah. Unlike so many comedians nowadays, and especially with the advent of podcasts over the last dozen or so years,
Yeah.
they don't worry about the content of their language. By that I mean they can work as dirty as they want. Because there used to be a time where you had to work clean, otherwise you'd have no chance of getting on television. Well, then cable
Yeah.
television came around, podcasts come around, and now you can say it and do whatever you want on podcasts
Yeah.
and cable TV, but you
Yeah.
still work clean.
I work absolutely clean. That's right. I mean, there might be, I might say dickhead or shit or something like that, but there's definitely I don't, drop the F-bomb at all. I don't talk about anything vulgar, in terms of, sexual stuff, nature. I don't delve into drugs either. And it's not politics. I don't really go in there either. So it's very, it's all about, the family experience. Number one. Now I'm getting a little bit edgier in terms of the fact that I tackle political correctness, I tackle the woke mind virus, and cancel culture, and also ridiculous notions that are out in the world right now.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how far we can go into it, but
We can go wherever you want, Joe.
sure, okay. I think that it's quite bizarre that I can have to be careful what I say because I could be cancelled speaking out about I don't know, the transgender movement, for example. Yet I have to listen to a 22-year-old tell me seriously that a man can have a kid and nothing will happen to that. That person can say whatever they want, right? But as ridiculous as that is, and yet nothing will happen to them. Yet I have to be careful what I've got to say, and I touch upon those sort of topics. Yet at the same time, I've got to touch upon them without getting, without using profanities or without specifically. I skirt around it, and I prefer to do that because it challenges me. Yeah.
I sometimes think to myself, this cancel culture, like many things that we've witnessed in our lives, the pendulum swings too far one way or the other. It's like we
Yeah.
try to correct mistakes that we've done. And let's be honest, I mean, some of the things that have been said and some of the attitudes that existed 25, 30 years ago should have been canceled. And then when we finally got around to it, we went way too far the other way.
Exactly right. And it's starting to swing back, Ted. I can feel it now, and I can feel it in my shows. Look, it also depends on your tribe, what I call the tribe of your followers, because my tribe, they kind of tend to agree with the kind of things that I got to say, and that's why a lot of comedians today don't work the university circuit, because a lot of the kids coming out of university today don't think that same way. And I noticed that the other day. I've been doing all the comedy festivals in Australia, and I do my show to my tribe, my crowd. They applaud what I say. I got asked to perform at a gala, and a lot of that audience were a lot younger audience, and the same material that got applause breaks the night before got oohs and ahs the next night, depending on the crowd. So you really need to know your audience, because it's futile me doing the kind of show that I do to a crowd of 20 and 20, 25 and 26-year-olds. Although I do get a lot of them coming to the show, that age group.
Right.
Yeah.
Don't you find it humorous when you make a remark, an off the cuff remark, or perhaps it's part of a scripted comedy, and you hear this ooh, but first they laugh and then they pass judgment.
Right. So that's called.
It's yeah. Go ahead.
Sorry. No. Go ahead. There's a name for it. That's all right.
Yeah. What is the name for that?
That's cognitive dissonance. The sound of cognitive dissonance. So what? And I've been doing this 27 years. And I've had a loyal following for a long time. And I actually address this in the show. So I say, so those of you who are new, let me tell you something that the people who have been coming to my shows have experienced. 10 years ago, we used to be able to laugh, and that was it. Now when you laugh, you have to think about what you laughed at, because see, laughing is an involuntary reaction. You can't help what you laugh at. Right? It finds you. You don't find it. And so what happens is you laugh, and then a second or two later, you go, oh. So basically what happens is this. Oh, I shouldn't be laughing at that. And so that sound is a sound that comedians have only started hearing in the last 6, 7, 8 years.
When you think about it, it's the proverbial slipping on the banana peel. Everybody laughs when they see somebody slip on a banana peel, and yet there's nothing really funny about somebody falling on their ass and hurting themselves. But for some reason, you immediately laugh.
Well, you do, because it's not you.
Yeah, exactly.
But one of the definitions of comedy is tragedy plus time. Right. So when that tragedy happened, i.e. falling on the banana peel, it wasn't funny then. But months down the track, you look back and you go, oh, if you had seen me, here's a video of me coming out of my doorstep and slipping on the snow, outside of But can I say this, that I really noticed this last year. So last year I was also on a world tour, and so I just finished my tour in Australia. I get off the plane, head on to Vancouver. I do my show in Vancouver, exactly the same routines that I was performing the week before in Sydney. I was performing in Vancouver, and I actually had to stop the show and tell the audience, put a disclaimer in and say, listen, guys and girls, you can actually laugh at this. It's okay. So the crowds in Canada are very sensitive. But as I moved over from the West Coast to the East Coast,
right,
the laughs got louder and bigger. Then I came back, and the last show that I did before I went back to Australia was in Los Angeles. And again, the sensitivity was there. So it's almost like, I don't know, people over on the West Coast are a lot more woke than the people on the East Coast of Canada.
I suppose you're right. But it's like dialects, in every country. I mean, you go to Italy, for example. I mean, how many dialects are there in Italy? In Canada, I mean, you listen to somebody speaking in Toronto and go to Newfoundland and listen to somebody speak there, and sometimes you don't understand what they're saying, and they don't understand you.
Yeah.
And it's the same country.
Yeah. Well, it's the same even with the Montreal Italians. Hey, bro, what are you doing, bro? Me, I like this, me. What about you, bro? What do you think, bro? You. Because, when they speak English, they speak like a French, like you would in French. Where apparently, I mean, I don't speak French, but apparently in when you speak French, when you ask someone if they like it, they say, do you like this, you? I like this, me. Apparently, that's the way the translation is. And so that's why the Italians I can tell, if I'm being served in a restaurant anywhere in the world by someone who lives in Montreal, I can immediately tell. I can say, hey, you're from Montreal, aren't you? And they're like, how do you know? Because I spent a lot of time there, and I can tell that they've got a very particular twang when they speak.
Ted Wallachin returns in a moment.
Fashion to go for men on the go. Hey, it's Ted Wallachin for Tom's Place. If you need to refresh your wardrobe this spring, there is no time to waste. Visit Tom's Place and check out the new spring and summer fashions. At Tom's Place, even the new arrivals are on sale. Spring colors, new patterns, new designs, designer slim fit suits sold elsewhere for as much as $8.99 each are now 3 for $1,200. No, let's check that to 3 for $1,100 at Tom's Place. And if a wedding is on your schedule, we've got a lot of great suits, perfect for your style and your budget. Available in multiple colors, and if you need a matching vest, just ask. Or if you prefer something more formal, how about a tuxedo, starting at only $5.99. Finally, we have selected sports jackets at 50% off. Say hello to spring suit fashions at Tom's Place. Get yourself a deal at Tom's Place on Baldwin Avenue in Kensington Market. We'll suit you. Have you been tasked with the role of a state executor, or expected maybe in the future you will be? Well, if so, let me make your life a lot simpler by introducing you to my friend Debbie Stanley. Debbie is the founder of ETP Canada. They specialize in estate administration. Their goal simply is to help Canadian executors understand their role and how to deal with the loved one's estate. Let's face it, there's no school for this, but ETP Canada offers services such as executor support, estate accounting, and they have a new online course called Executor Ready. It's an engaging video designed to make estate administration easier and affordable. And those are two comforting thoughts during a stressful time. So call Debbie Stanley at 1-866-309-0387. That's 1-866-309-0387. Or you can get her at info@etpcanada.ca. That's info@etpcanada.ca.
Now back to Ted Wallachin.
But have you noticed that our grandparents have become racist themselves? And they look at people in the street. These people are no good for Australia. But they should go back to where they come from. The only good thing about COVID is that now, when you don't want to go to a shitty function, you got a perfect excuse, don't you? Yes, I'd love to come to the baptism, but I got a tickle in my throat. Kids, you got Nintendo, you got PlayStation, you got Xbox, you got Wii, you got iPads, iPhones, and computers. And when you ask them how their day was, I was bored, I didn't have nothing. And speaking of technical support, how long do we have to wait on technical support? Have you noticed it just goes on forever? And the other day I was on the phone for Telstra, it felt like half a day. And then she comes on, oh, sorry, sir, sorry for the wait, how can I help you? Oh, that's all right, I've had a kid who fixed the problem, don't worry about it.
When you start talking in Italian or doing an Italian accent, like when you refer to your family, your parents or whatever,
Yes.
and because you're still carrying that, what we here in Canada hear as an Australian accent.
Yes.
It's like, it's a strange thing for us, because when I hear an Italian in Toronto talking
Yes.
with an Italian accent, mocking
Yeah.
an Italian accent, because
Yes.
he's not from Italy, it's a totally different sound than what I'm getting from you.
Right. So what actually happens is once I start speaking Italian, that accent goes. So you could get someone who was born in England, someone born in Canada, one person born in Australia, one person born in America, all from Italian backgrounds. When they speak English, you will know where they're from. Once they start speaking Italian, you won't know where they're from. And that's very interesting. So as long as we spoke in Italian or the dialects that we learned, you can't tell if I'm from Canada, America, England, or Australia. But once I start speaking English, you can.
Right.
And that's I've never been able to pinpoint. Maybe you need a special, someone who's an expert on linguistics to be able to determine why that is. But it's a very interesting phenomenon.
Yeah, it is. Joe Avati is my guest. When you first began your professional career, how much of your material was based on the fact of your Italian heritage?
Well, when I actually first began back at the Comedy Store in Sydney, there was a little bit about being Italian, but it was more of a generic show. Then I hit upon, because I got asked to perform at a function where there were many, many Italians. And so that particular night, my routine was all about being Italian. And I found that struck a chord. So I thought, right, I've hit on something here. So all of a sudden, the phone started ringing. And so then I focused all my attention on that. I focused my attention on my routine being in Italian. And that's what made me sort of famous all over the world, really, was that. So then my show predominantly became about being an Italian. Well, you know, having an ethnic background or an Italian background in an English-speaking country. And then and it's moved on from there. I still do that now, but it's more of a generic. So now I talk about being a father and how my Italian parents influenced me, and how that is influenced my fatherhood. I now talk about how my dad used to be strict with me, and he's completely soft like butter with my son.
Right.
And I talk about the generational differences in this particular show, and I tackle other things that I've never tackled before. But it seems to be working really well.
Because there is an inherent concern amongst those people such as yourself who work about talking about their work is based on, at least part of it,
Yes.
their ethnicity.
Yes.
And there's a danger of spending too much time talking about that and being known as, oh, that's the Italian comedian. Like Russell
That's
Peters
right.
was right on the borderline there for a while, because it was a lot of the stuff he did. We talked about his Indian background, and he was funny and
That's
funny and
right.
very funny. Then after a while,
Yeah.
you would hear people say things like, "Can you do something other than that?"
Yes. Yeah. Well, yes, I've gone through that as well. And I've gone through that as well. I'm a big fan of Russell's success.
Yeah, sure.
I met Russell back in 2001 or 2002, I think. He used to come to my shows in Toronto, and I've really enjoyed seeing his success and his trajectory over the years. So I definitely know what you're talking about. I still get called sometimes. When the other day I did shows in New Zealand, and some of my fans are like, "New Zealand? Why would you go to New Zealand? There's no Italians in New Zealand." Well, if you haven't been to my show for the last 5 years, you'll know that you don't have to be Italian to be at my show. Once upon a time,
Yeah.
you had to be Italian. These days, you can have any background and be at my show. So, I was tainted with that same brush. But, it takes a while to get out of it. And that's why I've been doing these shows. And COVID was absolutely wonderful. Whilst it was bad for a lot of people, it was wonderful for people like me, because people were stuck at home and went down rabbit holes that they've never been before, and discovered comedians that they've never seen before. And so all of a sudden my fan base grew dramatically, and it went wide, and it went to places like India, South Africa, Ireland, Scotland, Belgium, and it grew all over Canada. So I'm performing even after I've been coming to Canada for 22 years, I'm performing in places I've never performed in before because of that.
Is there a place, a city, a country where they welcome you with open arms to the point where it's almost embarrassing, where you think to yourself, I could say anything, I could read the phone book here, and they'd laugh for 20 minutes?
It used to be Canada, but no. Nowadays, you can get away with really weak material for the first 5 minutes, but then afterwards, people because you rely on because people, if you're famous, people will laugh at whatever you say for the first 5 to 10 minutes.
No, I didn't mean that it was weak material. I'm just saying that some places would open up more to you than others, because not all audiences are the same.
No, they're not. No, they're not. And they vary from country to country, and from town to town, from room to room. And it's amazing how an audience, you could get every single person of that audience by themselves backstage and tell them, I don't know, a racist joke, for example, and they would laugh. Collectively, you go out and then you tell them another joke that's also racist, and collectively, the same people that laughed individually backstage will all give you that, oh no, you can't say that, because in public people laugh differently than they do in private. When the light is on, they laugh differently to when it's dark.
So, how many kids do you have?
Yeah, I have one son here in Australia, and one daughter in North America.
Mm-hmm. And
Yeah.
how old are they?
So my daughter's 10 and my son is 2.
Okay, so the
Yeah.
2-year-old wouldn't understand really what daddy does. What
No.
does your daughter think about what dad does for a living?
Um, she knows I'm a comedian. She knows I travel around. Um, because of the nature of the relationship, I don't get a chance to speak to her much about it, So, um, but she certainly knows what I do. But I'm going to be seeing her now when I come in July. So it'll be interesting to see. She said that she sometimes YouTubes me, which is interesting. So it'll be, and I think she's very smart. She's a very smart little thing, and so it'll be interesting to see she what she says. The last time I was with her, I had no idea. On the second last day that we were together, she decided to tell me that she can do accents. She can impersonate accents, and my goodness, she was fantastic. I thought, wow, I had no idea. So I'm excited to explore that side with her when I see her very soon.
Yeah, I mean, if she came to you one day and said, when she was a little older, and said, Dad, I think I'm going to take that walk down the comedy street and see what happens. What would you say?
Well, yeah, I'd be very excited. So
Yeah.
the great thing about it is there's not many father son, father daughter, or daughter son, or daughter daughter combinations out there. In terms of comedy, like there is in say in the sporting field. And I definitely would explore that. I mean, look, just because the father was funny doesn't mean that the kid can be funny, but the father can definitely teach the kid the tricks of the trade
Right.
very early on. So they might get a bit of an advantage. But it's a very interesting sort of a phenomenon. Would the child be as funny as the parent if they were a comedian? Like, perhaps a sporting pedigree would or sporting talent or an acting talent or a musical talent
Hmm.
come out. Yeah, that'll be interesting to see.
Now, when you travel from country to country and city to city, how much time do you take preparing uh, to learn about what's going on in that country
Um,
without getting into heavy politics?
yeah, not much, not much. I like to stick to what I know. Every now and then I'll throw in something um, that uh, uh, that pertains to that particular city or the country. I don't spend a lot of time studying it. Though. I find that if it happens naturally.
Hmm.
And if it can happen naturally and organically, that's a lot funnier to me um, than if I sort of sat down and wrote about it. The other thing is I don't have a lot of time because I'm constantly moving. Um, sometimes, like for example, this particular tour, just in June alone, I'm in 17 major North American cities, so that doesn't leave a lot of time
No,
to be able to do
no,
that.
that's got to be exhausting. And after a while,
Um, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, after a while, do you start getting tired of yourself and your own material and start playing games with yourself on stage? Because you hear about actors who are in long running plays will start
Mm.
sort of dicking around with the dialogue a little bit and throwing a word in here, taking a word out, just for a change of pace.
Yeah. Well, Ted, funnily enough, I actually consider the I consider myself only becoming a comedian last year, even though I've been doing it for 27 years, because I never sat down and wrote a show. I always had material, kept old stuff, bought a few new bits and pieces in, but I got lazy for a while, for about 7, 8, maybe 10 years, and did a lot of the same stuff. And I thought, nah, if I'm going to have some longevity in this business, I really got to pull my finger out and write a new show. And that's what I did. And that show is still developing on stage. So I now constantly, every time I perform, I'm tinkering around. So whether
Hmm.
it be changing one word, moving a joke around, speeding the joke up, changing the order of the jokes, the timing of the joke. So that's what keeps it interesting for me.
And how How much do you interact with the audience during the course of your show?
I do. I interact a lot. So I always find a kid or a teenager. I always find people from Generation X, Generation Y, baby boomers, and then I also find the typical non-Italian, the what they call in Toronto the munja cakes. Um,
They don't
uh,
call them munja cakes in Australia?
no, the only
They
place
don't.
they could call munja cakes is in Toronto
Really?
or Ontario. Really, not even in. Oh no, it's kind of known around Canada. The word munja cake is kind of known, but it's predominantly in the Ontario region where munja cake. When you say munja cake, everyone knows what that is. So
Yeah.
in Vancouver, the Italians will know what a munja cake is, but the Canadians won't know what a munja cake is. But you know what a caker is.
Yeah, of course. Of course.
So
I
how
do.
do you know, Ted? How has the word munja cake become so popular amongst the non-Italians?
Probably because I grew up with a fair amount of Italians,
Right.
going through high school and after high school, college, etc. I mean, again, the population, the Italian population is quite large.
Yes,
in
yes, of
Toronto,
course.
so
Yeah. And do you know how the word munja cake came about?
I don't know that.
Okay, so what
I
happened
mean,
was,
they're the cake eaters.
yeah, that's right. But it was because when the Italians came over by boat, by the time that they got from Italy to Canada, they had run out of bread. So the first thing they did when they got on shore was to run off and get some bread. And of course, the bread that the Canadians ate was very different to the bread that so the bread that that Wonder Bread, that has a lot of
Yeah.
sugar in it. So of course, the bread that the Canadians ate was a lot sweeter, right? And so it was like a cake. And so the Italians go, "But these people, they eat cake,
Yeah.
cake. They're the munja
Yeah.
cakers." That's how it came about.
Well, my family is from Ukraine, and my dad
Right.
came from Ukraine, and that's
Yeah.
exactly the same thing. But to him, it was like I think he recalled it was like eating cotton batten. When the first sandwich that they got, because coming from Ukraine where they baked their own bread in the villages, and then
Yeah.
and eating Wonder Bread, it was like, what is this stuff?
Yeah. There you go.
You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
that is to bread what Chef Boyardee is to Italian food.
Yeah.
Nothing.
There you go. Yeah. Yeah. Well, if you have that background, you would you would take a liking to my show. That you would especially a lot of it. The people who really get the most out of it is anyone who had that immigrant experience, of growing up with an immigrant parent or being an immigrant themselves. That's what a lot of people who come to the show get a lot out of it. That's who does. Yeah.
Well, I find that true to be, with friends of mine who are Italians or Portuguese or Ukrainian. They all sort of grew up with that same Eastern, that European mentality, at least, where
Yes.
The hard work ethic, sexist,
Yeah.
tough as nails, and many of them immigrants and not by choice.
Yes.
You
Yeah,
know?
absolutely.
Not a lot of royalty coming out of those countries. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Your time in Canada, the first time you came to Canada, I wanted to
Mhm.
ask you,
Yes.
what were your impressions, and how long ago was that?
So I first came to Canada in April 2001. What happened was I started getting all these emails from people in Canada saying, when's Joe coming to Canada? We all love him here. And I was like, I've never been to Canada before. What, how the hell did this happen? And it happened because of Napster and a file sharing program back in 2000 and 2001. And when I landed, I was embraced with open arms, and I would conduct signings at HMV, and there'd be 500 people lining up, and I'd go to a restaurant and people would turn up and start looking through windows. It was like I was some sort of a big rock star. It was amazing. So my experience when I first came was delightful, because as you can imagine, having that sort of attention when you were someone who wanted that attention was just fantastic. And I'd spend 9 months in 2001, 2002, 2003. I'd spend 9 months of the year in Canada, mainly in Toronto.
Mhm.
So it holds a very special place in my heart, and I have a very, very fond memories. Um, it was the first time I saw snow. It was the first time I experienced having to severe cold, because obviously coming from Australia, the coldest that gets here during winter is about 3 or 4 degrees, plus.
Yeah.
So it was just, it was just a different experience. Everything was bigger.
Mm-hmm.
It was like America, but not exactly. But the people were more like Australia. Um, I just had a wonderful time, and I still do. I still have many, many friends there. I know the place very well. I can drive around Toronto without having to use a map. It's just great.
I've often wanted to travel to Australia. I haven't had the
Yeah,
opportunity to. I hope to in one day. One day,
yeah.
although I do have this awful fear of snakes, and you have some very scary snakes in your country.
Well, can I tell you? I think I'm 48 years old. I might have seen one snake in my time. You don't. It's not like they're.
No,
they're
no, because I see that they're not walking down the street beside you or
you know,
anything.
I mean, those the Crocodile Dundee, the movie, and the Crocodile
Yeah,
Hunter, the TV series, did wonderful things for Australia, but
yeah.
they also did terrible things for the reputation. The two things that scare people coming to Australia are the snakes and the spiders, and what people perceive them to be, and where they perceive them, how many there are, and
Hmm.
the length of the trip. When you tell people it takes 24 hours, it takes 5 hours to get to LA, and then 14-hour one way all the way from LA to Sydney or Melbourne. That kills most of the travel plans right there.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, the snakes and the spiders. But
Well,
it's
I
sorry.
played golf at a pro am with a professional golfer. Even he was on one of the lower tours. He was from Australia,
Right.
and we were playing, and I hit my ball into this area with really long grass,
Yeah.
and he was very hesitant to go into the grass with me to help me find my ball. And I said, "What's the matter?" He says, "You got snakes?" And I said, "What?" He said, "You got snakes?" I said, "We got snakes, but they're like garter snakes. They don't do anything. They don't hurt
Yeah.
you."
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we have some venomous snakes here. But the thing is with snakes, they're actually more scared of you. And so unless you step on one or you go
Yeah.
provoking
Well,
one, you're generally not going to get bitten.
yeah.
They're not there camping out there waiting for you. And it's the same with crocodiles. So crocodile, um, unless you jump into you wouldn't want to jump into a lake, or a river full of crocodiles, but they hunt you. So they'll wait for 2 or 3 days. And if you do the same repetitive movement, um, like say crayfishing or someone, and you're throwing out your crayfish basket, they might get you on the third day. They won't get you on the first day, probably. You know.
Uh,
Hey, you guys have to change your tires, and
yes.
during snowing, when it snows, we don't have to do that, but we have to watch out for crocodiles in certain parts of Australia, not everywhere, obviously.
No, I know. I realize that. But
Yeah,
I find it funny. You talk about changing your tires in the snow. There's this perception. A lot of people in the United States are always joking about Canadians, and sometimes
mm,
they're not even joking. They just don't know, and
yeah,
they think that we're skiing in July.
yeah.
And meanwhile, I look at the weather reports in Chicago and in New York, which are both south of Toronto.
Oh
Their
yes,
winters are worse than our winters in
oh
Toronto,
yes,
and they're mocking us and talking about our igloos that we live in. And meanwhile,
yeah,
they can't get around
yeah,
Manhattan for 3 days.
yeah. I know. I've been in Chicago in 2000 January 2020 doing a show, and I can remember what I had to wear walking around, and it was very cold. I
Yeah,
had to one of those ski masks
yeah,
downtown.
the bank
Yeah,
robber look.
yeah, the bank exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. That always works. You kick off your tour January or June 3rd. January, I'll be all right. June 3rd in Vancouver. Then you're off to Kelowna. Now they've had some really terrible wildfires in Western Canada in the last week or so.
oh no, I haven't heard that.
Yes, yes. So just
Wow.
be prepared for that. Then off to Winnipeg, Edmonton. A lot of Ukrainians in Edmonton, by the way. Calgary,
Oh, really? Okay, yeah.
Toronto, St. Catharines, Windsor, Thunder Bay, our nation's capital of Ottawa, and then you wrap it up in Montreal.
Yeah, and I've just added Regina as well.
Very nice.
So I've never been to Regina, so there's a new place. So I'm excited about that.
Well, it's a good thing that you're coming in the summertime to do these, because some of these cities that I mentioned, like Winnipeg and Edmonton and Calgary and Regina, could be pretty brutal in the wintertime.
I know. That's why I come in the summer, Ted.
Yes. No flies on this man, ladies and gentlemen. Joe, it's been a real pleasure chatting with you.
Thank you, Ted. Same.
I look forward to seeing you when you come to Toronto. I've seen a lot of your stuff on the internet, but I'd love to see you live. So I'll have to
sure, absolutely,
in Toronto.
Absolutely.
To come see you.
Yeah, it'll be a pleasure to have you at the show as my guest. So you just let you get your people to talk to my people, and my people talk to your people, and they'll talk to whoever they got to talk to, and we'll make it happen.
Problem is that my people aren't talking to me anymore.
I'm supposed to be the funny guy here.
I know that, and you are. Joe Avati, thank you very much. Ciao.
Thank you, Ted.
And thank you to all of you for tuning in and listening, and we hope that you'll join us again next week. And if you get a chance, drop by our website, www.tedwoloshin.ca, and there you will find a listing of all of our previous episodes. You can listen back to all of them. You can sign up and share your comments and thoughts with us. We would appreciate that. Also appreciate going online and check out the organ and tissue donation opportunities. You could change or even save a life. Have a great week.
The Ted Woloshyn Podcast has been brought to you by Tom's Place. For the finest in men's clothing at unbeatable prices, it's Tom's Place at 190 Baldwin in the heart of Kensington Market. Tom's Place will suit you. And ETP Canada, providing estate administration with ease. The Ted Woloshyn Podcast is produced by me, Becky Coles. Technical production by Paul Gatt. Music by Bike Thieves. For more information on this podcast and our sponsors, and to talk to Ted, go to www.tedwoloshyn.ca.